Let's talk about a day that brought the world's largest democracy to a complete standstill. On December 13th, 2001, for 40 absolutely terrifying minutes, the heart of India's government was under siege. This was an event that pushed two nuclear-armed nations right to the very brink of war. So let's dive in and really unpack what happened, how it all went down, and how it completely changed India forever.
You're looking at a quote from L.K. Advani, who was India's home minister at the time. And here's the thing you have to remember. He wasn't just some commentator watching from a safe distance. No, he was actually inside the parliament building as all of this was unfolding, along with more than 100 other high-ranking officials. The stakes, they just could not have been higher.
And that's the truly chilling part. It took just 5 heavily armed men in a single car to come terrifyingly close to pulling it off. This is the story of that attack, the massive international crisis it sparked, and the legacy that it's left behind.
Okay, so let's start right at the beginning, with the assault itself. We're going to break down that 40-minute siege that happened right at the core of Indian democracy.
Think about how incredibly fast all of this happened. At 11:40 a.m., the terrorists just drive right in, using a fake government sticker on their car to get past the first line of security. Not even a minute later, their car actually hits the vice president's parked vehicle. That collision immediately raises suspicion. Constable Kamlesh Kumari is the very first to react. She sees them, she raises the alarm, and for that act of incredible bravery, she becomes the first casualty. But her warning set off the lockdown, and it almost certainly saved hundreds of lives inside. For the next 30 minutes, it was just an intense, chaotic gunfight on the parliament grounds until, finally, all 5 attackers were killed.
So when the gunfire finally stopped, the human cost was tragically clear. 14 people were dead, that's 5 Delhi police personnel, 2 parliament security staff, a gardener who was just at work, and of course, the 5 attackers themselves. It was just a brutal, brutal price to pay to defend the nation's democratic center.
With the attackers neutralized, you might think the immediate threat was over. But in reality, a whole new challenge was just beginning. The shootout was done, yeah, but the hunt for the people who planned it all, the masterminds, that was just getting started. The Indian government didn't waste any time. The accusations were swift and direct, placing the blame squarely on 2 militant groups based in Pakistan, Lashkar-e-Taiba, or LET, and Jaish-e-Mohammed, or JM. Home Minister Advani took it even a step further, claiming it was a joint operation with support from Pakistan's intelligence agency, the ISI. Now, it is important to note that LET publicly denied they had anything to do with it. But as the investigation moved forward, the Delhi police did confirm that all 5 of the attackers who were killed were Pakistani nationals.
So the investigation on the ground quickly led to 4 key arrests. You had Mohammed Afzal Guru, who police said was the main coordinator of the whole thing. Then there was his cousin, Shaukat Hussain Guru, accused of setting up safe houses for the terrorists in Delhi. S.A.R. Gilani, a lecturer at Delhi University, was also implicated. And finally, Shaukat's wife, Afzal Guru, was arrested, charged with knowing about the plot and not reporting it. These 4 people would become the public faces of the long legal battle that was about to begin. And this is where the story just explodes. Because this wasn't just a domestic crime. The investigation's findings quickly escalated this into a full-blown international crisis, pushing 2 nuclear-armed neighbors right to the edge of war.
India's reaction was absolutely massive, on all fronts. Diplomatically, they pulled their ambassador from Pakistan and cut off all the major travel links, planes, trains, buses, all of it. But the most dramatic move, by far, was military. India moved over 500,000 troops to the border with Pakistan. Now, to put that in perspective for you, this was the largest military mobilization the country had seen in 30 years, since the 1971 war. The message couldn't have been clearer.
And this really shows you the tense standoff that followed. On one side, you had India with a very clear list of demands: ban LET and JAIM, arrest their leaders, and cut off their funding. On the other side, you had Pakistan. They officially condemned the attack. They did eventually ban 5 jihadi groups, and they really pushed for diplomatic talks, especially with the US, to try and de-escalate the whole military situation.
And believe me, this wasn't just a regional issue. The entire world was watching, absolutely terrified about what might happen between 2 countries with nuclear weapons. Foreign embassies in both India and Pakistan started evacuating staff, travel advisories went out. For weeks, the whole situation was just on a knife's edge.
Eventually, that military standoff did cool down, but the attack itself left this deep, permanent scar. So for our final section, let's look at the lasting legacy, how this one day changed India's laws, its security, and really, the soul of its democracy.
The legal journey for those 4 accused was, to put it mildly, long and complicated.
At first, the three men were all sentenced to death, and Afzal Guru was sentenced to 5 years in prison. But then came the appeals, and the outcomes changed a lot. Both S.A. Gilani and Afzal Guru were acquitted by the High Court. Shaukat Hussain Guru's death sentence was changed, and he was eventually released from prison. But Mohammad Afzal Guru's death sentence was upheld through the entire process, and he was ultimately executed in 2013.
The changes to the Parliament building itself were just as dramatic. The entire complex, which had once been a relatively open space, was transformed into what many called a fortified citadel. And this wasn't just about putting up a few new fences. It was a complete overhaul. New tech-based passes became mandatory for everyone: vehicles, members of parliament, journalists. A specialized paramilitary force, the CISF, was brought in to handle security. It created a much more restricted environment, and it kicked off a debate that's still going on today about finding the right balance between security and the open access that's supposed to define a democracy.
So in the end, the attack on December 13, 2001 failed in its main goal. It didn't wipe out India's leadership. But it did succeed in changing, forever, the relationship between the people, their elected officials, and the very buildings that symbolize their democracy. And it leaves us with a really big question to think about. In the face of a threat like this, how does a single event change not just the security, but the very soul of a nation's democracy?